Hmm. Hey, Carter. Hey, Joe. Hey, Donna.
Hey, Dan.
Hey.
Yeah.
Nice and comfy. What kind of dog is that?
He's some sort of Chihuahua Dachshund mix. Let's see him.
Yeah, it's a good boy.
You have a dog, right?
Yeah, I do.
How's he doing?
He's doing great. Thanks. He doesn't recognize the downsides of COVID. More time with his dad.
I mean, it's going to be a disaster when I tried to go back to work. He's so anxious now, as you can see. Well, I mean, he's attached, but. Hi, Valerie. Valerie.
Hi. How's everyone doing? We're going to get started in just a second.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to attend the meeting. I always look forward to these.
Wonderful. Just to let you guys know, we're going to be streaming this to the CB2 Facebook page. So we're going to go live in just a minute. So just please be cognizant of that. All right. We're going to get started. Hi, my name is Valerie Della Rosa, and I am the Reopening Working Group Chair. This is the Manhattan Community Board Reopening Working Group meeting on open restaurants and open streets restaurants, focusing on enforcement. We will get started in about 2 minutes, and we're just going to wait a few more minutes for people to join, and then we're going to get the live stream going in just a second. So see you in just a minute. And can I just ask everyone to please mute your, any of the panelists to please mute your sound? Thanks. Oops. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to Manhattan Community Board 2 Reopening Working Group. Tonight we will be going over the open restaurants and open streets restaurants enforcement. Again, I really want to stress that this is not a venue for about complaints of enforcement at specific venues. So I'll just go quickly to the agenda. I'm calling the meeting to order right now as we speak. I'd really just like to preface that we're really looking here for answers on guidance that the different guidance from the different agencies. So we have a great panel for you lined up tonight, and I'll go through those introductions in just a second. But I just really want to stress that today is December 7th, and tomorrow, December 8th, we will mark 6 months since phase 1 reopening of New York City. So I just thought that was an important milestone for us to consider as we move forward. So I'll quickly go through who we have on the panel tonight. From the 5th precinct for NYPD, we have Rodney Rosado. From FDNY, Sandra Sanchez, and one more person, I believe Greg Hansen. From DOT, we have Kyle Gorman. And we're expected to have someone from the Office of Special Enforcement, as well as someone from the 6th precinct from NYPD. So let me see if they have joined yet. I can't see the list when I have the screen share on. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chair Carter Booth, who wanted to say something quickly before we move to our panel.
I just wanted to welcome everybody to tonight's discussion. I think that all these topics have really been the swirling centerpiece of almost all of our discussions with respect to outdoor dining. So we're looking for some clarity so that both restaurant operators as well as community members can understand what the rules are and what to expect. So we're looking forward to tonight's discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Carter. We're going to go to the panel in just a second, but I just want to make sure that everyone sees the order that we'll be doing the questions. We're going to start with the Reopening Working Group Committee, move to CB2 board members, then operators, and then residents. And then we will go into business session. So I just want to quickly go over, before we get started, meeting protocol. We're just asking you to be respectful to whoever is speaking. Please do not use the chat or the Q&A to make derogatory comments about anyone. I'd like to keep the Q&A function open on, I'd like to keep the chat function open on Zoom to everyone. I think it's important for people to have that discussion on the attendee side as well. But again, if it gets to be out of hand or just inappropriate, we will shut it down. Next, attendees will be on mute until the Q&A portion of the meeting, which I outlined on the agenda, and we will elevate you to speak only when called on by group. There will be no video function for members of the public when asking a question. Next, we will ask you to either raise your hand and use the Zoom Q&A function to ask questions. Due to time constraints, we won't be able to get to every question, but I want to be able to make sure that we're able to follow up with the appropriate agency on your question, and keeping all questions in the Q&A function on Zoom will help us do that. So help us help you. And then please abide by the Q&A norms. This is taken from Janine Kiley, who put this together for her committee. Really just using I statements versus you, being brief. Please stay on topic, and please do not use the Q&A function on Zoom or the chat, or when you're asking a question live here to ask about a specific venue complaint. That's not what this is about tonight. And Are there things, I'll put these back up when we're in the Q&A portion of the meeting. It's *9 on your phone to raise your hand if you're dialing in, and the raise hand function, but please wait until your group is called on to raise your hand. And then as far as the unmute, please make sure that you unmute yourself before speaking. That way we can just cut that extra time out. And again, it's *6 if you're dialing in. That's all I have there. Stop this screen share. Let me just see. Okay, it looks like we have Carter, have we elevated, or Joe, have we elevated Kyle, Greg, or Everin? I'm just looking at the chat of who. Okay.
Yes, we have.
Okay, great. Is there anyone I didn't mention who is here? Rodney, Sandra. Okay, great. I'm going to allow, or I'd like for the reopening working group committee to start us off with questions. So if anyone wants to kick us off, or if not, I can. I can also quickly go over our mandate tonight, which is really, while I let you guys ponder on that. As I mentioned, we really want to focus on what are the rules, how are they being enforced, and I really want to use this to really inform the processes that we have. Great. Donna, if you want to get us started.
Just to be clear, Valerie, am I asking questions on enforcement specifically, or the rules and regulations? Should I just get going and you tell me if it's for a later panel, or?
I mean, everything's, I mean, it's.
Okay, fine. I'll just start going. So one of the questions is, how does an operator determine the capacity for these enclosed outdoor structures when they have no capacity? Is one question.
You know,
I would just-
before we get going, why don't we have each of the panelists introduce themselves, and they can just give us a quick overview of the area so we know who the right people are to refer these questions to. I see we've got Captain Lynch on. We have Kyle Gorman from DOT. We've Rodney Rosado, I don't know your rank, from the NYPD, I believe from the 5th Precinct. And we've also got Sandra Sanchez from the FDNY. Do you guys want to just give a brief introduction of each of yourselves and the areas that you guys cover? I'm going to start with my screen. Captain Lynch, do you want to start us off? Looks like your screen just froze there for a second. Captain Lynch, do you want to introduce yourself and start us off? Okay.
He's muted.
So yeah, you're muted. Okay, so maybe Officer Can from the 6th Precinct, do you want to just say hello?
Hi, everybody. Nice to be on this call. We cover the entire West Village, 14th Street to Houston, and West Side Highway to Broadway.
Great. I'm not sure if it's Detective or Officer Rosado. Okay, don't hear from you. Captain Lynch, do we want to go back?
Yeah, it's Officer Rosado, 5th Precinct, Community Affairs. I cover Chinatown, Nolita, Little Italy. Any questions, please send them over.
Great, thanks. Captain Lynch? Wait, you're muted again. I'm not sure what happened there. You were unmuted.
Is that better?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Great.
Greg Lynch, I'm assigned to Division 1. Our office is located at 253 Lafayette Street. We cover all of Lower Manhattan from 42nd Street to downtown. I am in charge of basically the outdoor dining enforcement program. Our job is to supervise teams of firefighters and officers to ensure safety for the public and our members.
Great, and Sandra Sanchez?
Hello, good evening. Sandra Sanchez, FDNY Community Affairs, and I'm borough-wide covering both Manhattan and Brooklyn.
Great, and then Kyle Gorman?
Good evening, everyone. My name's Kyle. I'm from the Department of Transportation. I'm on the team that's managing the open streets and open restaurants programs, of which enforcement is definitely a key part of the conversation. I work citywide, all over the city.
Great, I think that's everybody.
Carter, I just want to say that Captain Spataro from the 6th Precinct is also joining us as commanding officer.
Good evening, everyone. How are you?
Thanks. It looks like you guys are in Washington Square Park.
En route.
Yeah.
We're en route.
Okay. All right, thanks. You guys want to go back to the questions?
That's great.
Now that
Thanks.
we've got,
Art.
So Valerie, I'll just, how is somebody supposed to know how many tables go inside those enclosed outdoor structures? Is that an appropriate question for somebody on this panel?
I mean, it's yes, because that leads to the question of what's enforceable. Is that against the existing guidance? So maybe
I'll just, so on the sort of capacity front, that's definitely a question that's best left to, I think, the Department of Buildings, I believe, unless FDNY has anything to add here, but I don't think they do. But yeah, the DOB definitely is the one who's going to be able to give you the best info there.
So Kyle, we're however many months into this. Where is this information housed that people can find? We'd like to put a link on our website so that people can find it easily and understand, because the question that goes hand in hand with this is, when does the roadbed outdoor structure become an indoor dining structure? As far as if 2 walls are covered, it's an outdoor dining, and then if there's more than 2 sides, becomes indoor. And we're looking at Monday potentially having some changes in indoor dining, and I think that's the open question that many of the residents who are on the call tonight have, and I think many of the restaurant operators as well. You know, what happens Monday, and you know, what is the occupancy supposed to look like if the sides are all closed up?
Yeah, I think that these are really great questions. What I'm going to do is drop in the chat for the panelists, and you all can share this with the public, is the sort of guidance that the Department of Buildings gave on structures, which I don't believe specifically calls out occupancy, but if everyone should definitely read it. There's a specific section just on open restaurants. I am definitely not the expert on this, but I know that there definitely is a specific calculation that people do to sort of determine what occupancy is. Obviously, there might be a special consideration for the fact that this is outdoor dining, or indoor dining, and what's somewhat of an outdoor dining situation. So let us, I would say definitely reach out to the Department of Buildings on your end.
Okay, but so maybe you can just run through us who enforces each section, because at some point, you know, I think this is where the frustration is happening on everybody's part is that nobody's quite clear on which, why there's so many different agencies doing enforcement, and how do you if somebody, for example, Bob Gormley, our district manager, who's on the call now, it's like if we get complaints to the office, and then we're advised to make a 311 complaint, how do we, as a board, make an appropriate complaint so it lands in the right place? Because if there's an open dining complaint, it would go to DOT, not to DOB, if it had to do with occupancy. And from what I'm hearing, you're saying you're not the right agency to address that. It would be DOB. So how does that get there?
I'd also like to stress just really quickly, because in the chat people are asking why DOB is not on the call, and DOB was invited to this call but did not confirm a representative.
Yes, it definitely would be preferable if the Department of Buildings was on this call so they could advise on this specific issue. We do have a proactive and a complaint-driven sort of system in which how we do inspections, but restaurants can really expect visits from all different types of city agencies, such as the Department of Health, DOT, the Mayor's Office of Special Enforcement, and others. We are really trying to make sure from DOT's perspective that they are in compliant with our posted citing guidelines. I know it's not necessarily the answer that we're looking for right now, but it would really be up to the Department of Buildings and maybe some other agencies that I just spoke about in terms of enforcing issues related to occupancy.
So going back for a second, that's a great point that you're raising, right? When does one aspect go from one agency to another? So the citing guidelines for DOT with respect to roadbed dining, that's under your citing guidelines, building the structure, the various mechanics of that. But if more than two sides are enclosed, your rules are no longer the governing rules. It becomes the DOB's rules. Or can you explain to us where that transition happens from DOT's oversight to DOB's oversight?
I don't necessarily have a step-by-step system that I can really lay out here, but when issues are presented to us that are related to other agencies' jurisdictionality, they're referred when appropriate.
And so a couple of conversations I had today, people were, if there's a change where indoor dining is not allowed, how is that going to impact roadbed dining structures?
Roadbed dining structures, either you participate in outdoor dining and follow all the guidelines that are sort of consistent with an outdoor dining type of situation. If you are still doing indoor dining in a roadway structure, you must still follow indoor dining guidelines, which, depending on where we're at in the coming days, will obviously change or stay the same. So you will still have to follow the guidelines that are set forth by the state and the city as it pertains to indoor dining.
So just to be clear, do you guys have guidance if indoor dining is not allowed that you're going to be providing, so that we have clarity, everybody's on the same page with this? Because we spend a lot of time, this is where this is coming from. We spend a lot of time, as you know, sort of trying to figure out what the rules are to begin with, let alone where we go from there. And so it's hard for us to point people in the right direction when we don't know where to point them. And so if there were to be changes, how would people know what the rules are? And would you give any guidance on that proactively, or has you discussed that internally about how you share that?
When we share the changes to the program,
meaning if indoor dining is not allowed, how would you inform those who are participating in the program that if their structures are covered on more than two sides, I mean, what do you say? Like, how is this conversation begin?
So yeah, so I think if there was a mandate set out by the state that sort of would preclude indoor dining from happening in New York City, we would immediately notify all the 10,000 plus restaurants that are participating in this program. If any restaurants are on the call tonight, they could definitely sort of back up the fact that we have been in very proactive communication with them. Anytime there's been a snow emergency, or not a snow emergency, a wind emergency, although there might be a snow emergency soon, or other type of inclement weather, we've been very proactive in sort of communicating that information to restaurants. So if there were changes related to indoor dining and that's impact on row bed structures, we would be very proactive in letting everyone know about that. Now, if there are, of course, people who decide to not follow those regulations, we of course will continue on our proactive and complaint-driven inspection sort of MO and respond accordingly. Along with, of course, our agency partners. I mean, someone said it in this chat, I'm underscoring the fact that the Department of Buildings is really a key player here. One thing to note is, we are the DOT. We have typically only ever had to deal with the street and our transportation realm. And now we're talking about, structures and things like that. So that's why we really, really value our partnerships with our sister agencies who have, undoubtedly great experience in this realm.
Great. Thank you for that, Kyle. Donna, did you have another question? Does anyone else on the committee have questions?
I have other questions, but if somebody else has questions, they can go ahead first.
I would just go ahead.
I'll just go ahead. I mean, so the propane heaters, there's a lot of questions around the propane heaters and how far away they have to be from buildings, how far away they have to be from tables, how far away they have to be from people wearing Polartec clothing, because that may be considered combustible. So if we could get some clarity on that, that might be very helpful for people.
Yes, I can answer those questions. I have to say that the legal use of propane heaters is an extremely difficult thing to do in Lower Manhattan. The fire department and the DOT, by the way, have come up with certain clearances that are required that are very difficult to meet for sidewalk and the street structures you mentioned. To begin with some numbers, a propane heater has to be 10 feet away from any building entrance or window or ventilation part thereof. It has to be 5 feet away from any combustible material. That includes tables and chairs, if they're made of combustible material. They have to be at least 5 feet from another heater, and they have to be, they cannot under any circumstances be within those structures, whether they're on the street or the sidewalk. They cannot be, I can't emphasize that enough, they cannot be inside a street structure or a tent or an awning of any kind whatsoever. Its only legal place is completely outside on the sidewalk. They're not allowed on the streets. And DOT has an 8-foot clearance from the curb of the street in towards the sidewalk. So if you could picture in your mind where a restaurant frontage is and how wide a sidewalk is, you don't have a lot of room for these heaters. We're strongly recommending restaurateurs to consider other alternatives such as electric heat or natural gas pipe heat. But propane is extremely volatile, extremely dangerous. Any minor leak undetected, a passerby with a cigarette could ignite one of these heaters to flame, blowtorch proportion. So those are the numbers off the top of my head. And there was one other number, I think 5 feet. If you had, it's a rare circumstances, but if you had a proper tent or awning with a fireproof roof over the sidewalk, it has to be at least 5 feet from the top of the heater. So those are the numbers, if that helps you with the clearances.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question to that, Captain Lynch. Just out of curiosity, how long has propane been illegal across the 5 boroughs, and why was it illegal?
Are you talking about the Executive Order 153, or are you talking in general, has propane been allowed to be used in New York City?
In general.
Okay. That I don't know the specific answer to how long propane has been allowed, but we've always had specific regulations and limit of use of propane in the city, in particular, mostly private dwelling areas, private houses, for instance. You know, your typical cooking a barbecue gas grill kind of thing. Has to be at least 10 feet away from the house, from the structure. We have to have a garden hose. You know, it has to be disconnected when not in use and so forth. Propane has never been allowed near a multiple dwelling of any kind. Any restaurant is never allowed to be stored inside any structure whatsoever. And I cannot stress that enough. It is the nature of propane. If you need to know, if you want to know, it's a liquid gas. When you know it expands, it contracts. So when you heat it, the gas, it's, you know, it's a very good flame. It offers very good heat. There's many positive uses for it, but its properties are such that it's very volatile. It's very explosive, and you know, the people working with it have to be, you know, trained and know what they're doing, be able to detect a leak, and know where to store it. It is heavier than air, so one of the dangers we see a lot, and we foresee this problem with restaurants, is that they're going to want to have cylinders, and you know, when they close up the shop for the night, they're going to put them inside the restaurant on the first floor, or they're going to store them in the basement, or they're going to hide them on the roof, or in the backyard, perhaps a courtyard. Any of those places are deadly. If the tank develops a leak, the gas seeks its lowest level, and what's in the basement? A boiler. Boilers kick on and off. That spark will set off an explosion. So there is absolutely no storage of propane permitted at all, except for a special permit, which my understanding is very difficult to get granted by the fire department for restaurants to use in this emergency situation, for commerce, I mean. Does that answer everything? Okay.
Yes.
Sally, can I just ask then one follow-up with that, which is, are you sweeping, is the FDNY going around just looking at places to see who's conforming, or are we relying then, would that be the public to be calling the FDNY to find out?
Yes, they're both are correct. The public can certainly always register complaints. I have a phone number if people want it, if a person can call to register a complaint. If they think they see something, a dangerous use of propane, you can call us there. If you call 911, of course, the members will come, the units will come. Or if you see a fire truck on the street, you can walk up to the firefighters and say, you know, I think there's something wrong with this restaurant over here. You guys mind taking a look? And they'd be happy to come over, and they'll initiate an investigation and an inspection. My team is doing about 3 or 4 times a week. We're going out to various neighborhoods. Today we did 32nd Street, I believe, Koreatown, and we didn't find any violations. We've been down in this area, Little Italy, Tribeca, we found quite a bit of issues. We've already issued about 24 violations for not having proper permits and improper storage and not having proper clearances, as I mentioned earlier. But we have roving teams to do the enforcement.
Can you give us an example of proper storage in Manhattan so that places can understand how they could do it if they have,
okay,
the circumstances to do it? I think that everybody hears what they can't do, but it would be helpful to hear what they can.
I have to be honest, this whole project reminds me of the Apollo 13 movie where Gene Kranz says, tell me what works on the spacecraft, if you remember that episode. It's really difficult. I hate to be negative, but there are more negatives than there are positives with this program. We're very, very concerned about it. To answer your initial question about storage, there is no storage. Basically, if you have a propane heater, which I'm sure if everyone knows what they are, I wish I had some visual aids, I'm sorry. It's a tall structure and the 20-pound cylinder goes underneath and it has like a metal shroud and you connect the hose and turn it on. One heater, one propane tank. There are no spares. Okay, so that's the rule. So if you have a permit or your plan says I have 6 heaters, you can have 6 tanks. Now, well, what happens when I run out of propane fuel? Well, by the book, you have to call your propane vendor and time it out. Have them exchange tanks. And this is, it's a very Herculean task. We get it, but that's the law. That's the rule. There is no storage. Absolutely never, ever, ever. A 20-pound cylinder cannot be in any building at any time, not even for 2 seconds. Example, in Little Italy, there's many restaurants you may know that have, rear courtyards. You go down Mulberry Street, you walk through the restaurant, you have a little courtyard outside, nice. It's not permitted to carry the tank, which you legally have, through the building for 5 seconds to put it in that back courtyard. The logic being, if the tank leaks, the person drops the tank, it rolls, it could explode and cause a building fire. So, the exception to this is the 1-pound cylinders. Are people familiar with those? They're sort of like camping things, the smaller ones. Anyway, those are permitted to be stored inside. We have granted no permit needed for up to 45 of those, provided they are stored on the first floor in a metal cabinet in a sprinkled area and no smoking signs, and the cabinet is clearly marked propane storage for the 1-pound cylinders only. Other than that, a 20-pound cylinder, I could conceive it to be stored if a restaurant had somewhat of a parking lot, which I don't see existing in Lower Manhattan, and a cage, and stored vertically, the 20-pound cylinders. And it has to be a very special permit outside of this program, which again, my understanding is they're not granting them easily. So it's a 1-for-1, 1 tank per heater. The oddball thing I will say about this, and this is an exception to the mayor's executive order, and I don't know, Sandra, if you have knowledge on this or not, you might have more of the legal on that executive order, but technically a civilian can transport a limited amount of propane in their private vehicle, provided it is in the back seat, seat belted in vertically or tied in very securely and visible so that you cannot put it in the trunk of a car or in a vehicle with privacy glass. The logic being, if that car catches on fire, the firefighters approaching the vehicle, they take a glance at it, they're not going to see the tank inside the trunk. And if the car catches on fire, it blows up. But in that extreme situation, you're allowed to store 2 tanks, I believe, into 40 pounds in a private car. So if the restaurant owner, had his car parked on the street nearby, technically, that's okay. And other than that, that's the only means of storage. So it's an extremely difficult program, I think, option, if you will, to use propane for outdoor dining. I wish I had better positive news, but I don't. And we strongly encourage the restaurants to use electric heaters.
I have two follow-ups to that. One is, so on that specific note, right now that you just said, you're saying that a private car can be parked on the street with two 20-pound propane tanks.
Outrageous as it sounds to me, yes.
Filled with propane.
Yes. And as far as we're concerned also, I'm glad you brought that up. A cylinder, empty or not, is illegal in any structure.
Okay.
With the exception of the 1 pound cylinders up to 45 that I had mentioned earlier.
So we shouldn't be seeing any metal cages on the sidewalk that are holding.
No, nor should they be chained to the little tree cages and guards and so on. We've been seeing that. The only legal propane is in the cylinder itself. So at night, they're supposed to disconnect the tanks and make arrangements for, maybe the owner can put him, and again, legally, they can only put 2 in a car if they're using private cars, or they use one of the city's vendors. I don't know the names of the private contractors, but there are 2 big ones in New York City. I think they're both in Queens. And it's a cottage industry for them right now,
Got it. So really quickly, I know there's a lot of comments in the chat. And again, I'd like to stress, I'd really like to get your questions asked, and we will get to that. We will get to attendee questions, but I want to make sure we're using the Q&A function for questions. But Captain Lynch, complaints about heaters. You had mentioned a phone number. What is that phone number?
I hope it's still current, but it's 718-999-2541. People can make complaints.
And what's that experience like when someone calls in?
Well, I've never called in a complaint as a civilian, so I really have no idea. But this is my understanding of this is how it works for us. When you make a complaint like that, it's not a 911 call. That's one thing I want to make clear. The call is screened by a fire prevention inspector. And by the way, I don't work for fire prevention. I work for the regular fire department. I was on an engine and a ladder company, and right now I'm detailed offline to do this work. So, but there are just 2 distinct, bureaus within our department. I'm in operations suppression, temporarily assigned to this project. But the fire prevention.
We're glad to have you. Thank you. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a pinch hitter for Chief Hansen, so that we both share the same first name, but not the same rank, I'm afraid. So.
Thank you, Sandra, for putting that phone number in the chat.
Just when you call, it's going to be a 24-hour. The fire department has 24 hours to investigate that call. So
they're reaching a human on the phone, or is it a voice thing?
It's probably I really don't know. I've never called.
No worries.
It's probably a recording. We get complaints all the time. A lot of time it's, disgruntled employees, disgruntled residents, more of a neighbor dispute kind of thing. People throwing cigarette butts from the rooftop onto my building, or, the fire escape has too many plants on it. That's this kind of thing. So, but this is certainly a legitimate thing. And, if people are very concerned, they can always call 911 if they feel, they think it's a dangerous condition. We'll come. We'll make it a hats and horns call, as we say.
Nice. Nice to know the lingo. And so if I'm an operator, so that's kind of residents. If I'm an operator and I have questions, who can I call and who can I pick up the phone and call and ask? I know there's specific question in somewhere in here about electric heaters and specific things about installing them and whether or not they need to build out an external circuit breaker. So if I'm an operator and I have questions, I want to be in compliance. Who am I calling or what am I looking at?
Well, Well, I apologize in the fact that I kind of found out about this meeting last minute. So all of my notes and papers are at my office in Soho. And you're actually looking at my wife's acupuncture office right now. So I don't have any fire department, but to help you out, the people, the restaurants should have been able to easily online, if they go to FDNY website, you know, there's links to, you know, how do I provide safe outdoor dining? How do I sign up for the propane program? All that information should have been there. So this is what the frustration is. We think that what's happened is a lot of people have bypassed the fire department completely. All these restaurants that are using propane should have gone through the fire department to obtain initially an attestation form, temporary permission to conduct outdoor dining without what we call a certificate of fitness. A certificate of fitness is like a little driver's license. It's like it's a permit to do something fire related. For example, welders have to get it. Fire safety directors in high-rise buildings have to get a certificate of fitness. Sprinkler plumbers have to get a certificate of fitness so they can, you know, inspect and maintain all these systems. So right now we're asking the restaurant owners and their waiters and waitresses and servers and hostesses, they have to have at least one person trained. They take an online test. It's probably $20 or $30 to take the test, and they have to demonstrate competence in operating a propane tank. So that's called a T93, by the way. And again, this is all on the website that they should have applied for. And one person has to have that certificate while the restaurant is open for customers.
Before we move off this topic, can you just explain what happens when you visit an establishment? So
Certainly.
You get a complaint, and what is that, and what happens?
Okay. Well, whether it's a complaint or it's an my team is just doing reconnaissance, surveillance, if you will, on we're walking down the street, we're looking for restaurants with propane heaters, frankly. So what we do when we arrive is, we have to speak to a person in charge. We say, we noticed you have propane heaters. Do you have your attestation form? Do you have your permit? We have a whole checklist of things. So if they say, yeah, sure, I have my form, I have my paper right here. I go, okay, well, all right. How many heaters do you have? Well, I have 6. Do you have any, are you storing any propane? Well, yeah, I've got like 6 in the back. No good, violation. We noticed the heater is 2 feet away from a subway grate or 3 feet away from the entrance of the building. No good. It's got to be 5 feet. Got to be 10 feet away from the subway. It's got to be 10 feet away from the door. So our method of enforcement is called a violation order. Do I need to explain that to people?
Yes.
Okay. A violation order from the fire department is our go-to tool to enforce the rules. So we're not trying to, we're people too. We don't want to hammer the heads of people trying to make a living. It's not what we're ever about. So we feel terrible about this, but we got to maintain public safety. So the violation order gives you kind of a little bit of wiggle room in that we formally write out the violation. For instance, heater is 3 feet away from the building, it should be 5. Simple violation. Let's correct it right now in front of me. So the person moves the heater 5 feet. I personally abate the violation. The violation goes away. Now, let's say the next day I come back, not only is the heater 3 feet away, but it's right next to the building. And not only that, but they put 3 of them in front of the building. Well, the people are cold, okay. Well, you're kind of tying my hands. I gave you an out, you abated the violation, but now you're just doing it again. It's a repeat violation. So our next tool of enforcement is called an FDNY summons. They used to be called notice of violation by the Environmental Control Board, which in my understanding no longer exists. It's the oath. So these are very serious violations. If we file an FDNY summons, it's supposed to be 34 days to self-correct. You fill out an affidavit, you get it notarized, you mail it back to the city, or you can do it by phone or online. I understand now in the COVID era. But if you ignore the violation, or if it's a repeat violation, it's a $5,000 fine. So, you know, we have some serious tools, but our main goal is to keep the people safe and keep the firefighters safe. That's our goal. So the violation order, it's a very simple tool. It's a legal size paper. It's, you know, triplicate, you know, the violator gets one, we keep one, we send one downtown, you know, we keep a record of it, and we're flexible with it. We can keep we don't have to register the violation immediately. You know, we have some wiggle room too, you know, but we can go back and say, well, you know, it looks like you're trying to make some progress. You moved it 4 feet. It needs to be 5 feet, but how about you just move it another 5 feet? I'll get some, you know, my helpers just helping other customers. So, you know, if we can work with the restaurant owners and, you know, help us help them, you know, we're more than willing to, you know, to be as benevolent as we can, but you know, there's just certain things we cannot walk away from. And so the violation documents what's going to happen. Now, let me add one more thing. If we find illegal storage of propane cylinders, and we've already had 3 incidents in Soho where people had over 20 of these cylinders. And mentioning the DOT structures, the outdoor boxes, maybe my colleague from DOT can explain that. I think they require like a buffer box around. Some of them do. People were building little clever bench lids and putting propane tanks in there, totally illegal. Now, can you imagine a bus or a fire truck or a cab sliding down an icy street, smashing into one of these things and igniting, you know, 6 hidden propane tanks? This is a reality that we're dealing with. So we confiscate these things. We consider it contraband if you don't have, nobody has a legal storage permit. So if we see 20 extra cylinders, we're automatically seizing them. We call a battalion chief to the scene. We fill out a form. We voucher the tanks. We advise the owner, you know, we gave you a violation and we're seizing these tanks. And we have to special call a hazardous material logistics vehicle. There's only one in the city, by the way, to come to the scene and safely transport the tanks to Randall's Island where they're impounded. If they're not claimed within 30 days or so, they're destroyed. So those are the enforcement tools we have.
Thank you. I want to call on, I know Bob Ely had his, on the committee, had his hand raised for a while there. So Bob Ely, if you're
Yes.
a question,
Yeah,
great.
most of my questions were answered on the tanks, but just, and I appreciate that very much. You know, I think you answered the question, but it wasn't completely clear. Backyards, because you have to go through the building, or is backyards in general not a place where you can store or have heaters?
Excellent question. If you have a corner property or your yard adjoins the street, no problem. You can have if you have a courtyard in which you can travel from the street to the yard, the heater is permitted, provided all the clearance issues are met. Under no circumstances can a 20-pound propane tank be carried through a building for a period of 15 seconds into a backyard. If the only means to get to that enclosed yard is through the building, is not permitted.
In terms of storage, I'll be very specific. If there are 12 heaters or so, these propane heaters on the sidewalk, for example, they each have the 20-gallon tanks. What happens at night? If those heaters are either stored on the sidewalk and hooked up somewhere to the building so that they don't get stolen, where are those tanks? What's supposed to happen to those tanks at night?
What is supposed to happen to those tanks is a proper vendor is supposed to take them at the end of close of business, because they cannot be stored under any circumstances in a building, whether they're empty or not. Whether, you know, you're going to have your vendor come by in the morning to refill them, makes no difference. There's always residual gas. and you know, they're not permitted to be stored inside, not permitted to be stored on the sidewalk. The only time they're permitted is if a person with a certificate of fitness is on the scene, and you know, the restaurant is open, customers are there, and the person's there supervising it. And by the way, here's another difficult thing. If the tank does run out and you have a legal vendor deliver you a new tank, you can't change it with customers nearby. So, you know, it's like I say, I mentioned earlier, you know, if the restaurant happened to have, lucky enough to have a parking space close by, they can have 2 tanks stored in their vehicle. But it's a very difficult, and believe me, I didn't make these rules, but I was handed my marching orders, and I have to follow them. And we feel terrible about it. We know it's a struggle out there. We love to eat. Look at me. I mean, you know, firemen we love to go to restaurants, but it's just not safe. It's a very dangerous piece of equipment, and it cannot be stored in a building, cannot be stored outside in the street, unless you were that rare exception that you had a proper cage, and it was away from the building. It has to be, you know, 5 feet away from the building, 10 feet away from a window, and not underneath a fire escape.
A lot has been revealed here. Thank you, Captain Lynch.
I know. I'm a really nice guy. You should all get to know me.
I'm going to go to Bob Gormley next.
Thank you, Valerie. And thank you, Captain. One question, with all the restrictions and limitations and dangers of these propane heaters, 2 questions. Are you aware of any restaurants, at least in our district or in Lower Manhattan, that have been issued those attestation forms or have the proper certificates? And secondly, my second question is, during your team's sweeps, have you found any restaurants that were using propane heaters legally?
Yes, to answer both questions. We have found people with the proper permits, proper, you know, to the best of their ability. A lot of what we're seeing is a lot of things that are frankly kind of out of their control. I mean, they have a limited sidewalk space, so they're kind of like, well, you know, I really don't have the 5 feet. I have the 3 feet. I have the 2 feet. You know, is that okay? You know, that's what we're running into a lot. We're trying to work with people. I mean, like I said, we've had at least 3 incidents. I don't, actually, these were all done by units in the field. That is to say, complaints were received, a fire truck responded, and they discovered, you know, excessive storage of tanks, and, you know, seizure of contraband had to be implemented. So we've had at least 3 of those incidents, but we have had people who seem to understand. I personally did an inspection in the Lower East Side 2 days ago, and you know, I saw the propane heaters placed illegally, but when I went up there was no propane. The restaurant, you know, they said, well, we couldn't comply. We couldn't make it work, so I'm returning them. And, you know, it's sad, but that's the reality. You know, he didn't have the required clearances. He didn't have any convenient way of legally exchanging the tanks. And that's our biggest fear is at night people close down and we have no way to enforce this. Think about it. How are we going to enforce it? We're going to knock on, you know, a closed restaurant door, or buzz the, you know, the apartment upstairs. Hey, can you let us in the basement? And we just want to check to see if we're assuming that there are illegal tanks in every restaurant, every building, every multiple dwelling that has a restaurant. When the chief rolls in, he's making up his size up saying, if I have a fire in this building, I'm assuming there's propane illegally stored. I mean, we have to operate on that basis.
Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, Captain Lynch. Does anyone else on the committee have questions?
Valerie, I had one question. Sorry, I can't raise my hand. I have seen a couple of restaurants using kerosene heaters, and I'm just wondering from Captain Lynch if there's any difference using you know, like those old ones. I had one growing up in my home. Looks like R2D2.
I'm not familiar with anyone. I don't believe they're legal in New York City, period. My understanding is kerosene heaters are completely illegal within the 5 boroughs. So I'd be interested in seeing it. The other day I was with one of my fellow captains enjoying a beverage in Bay Ridge, and they had a fire pit with the Duralogs, but it was, and to be frank, I didn't know the rule. He was asking me, Greg, is this legal? And I was like, I think what the rule is, if the neighbor complains about it, then we have to confiscate it. But if nobody complains, like in your backyard, for instance, I'm talking about that fire pit, what I just described. It's legal, but don't quote me on that. But I know for certain that a kerosene heater is pretty sure that's illegal in the 5 boroughs.
Joe, you're not the first one who's raised that.
The kerosene.
The business that has the kerosene heaters, yeah.
It was very warm. I was able to eat next to it, but.
Yes, I did notice the Post had an article, I think, about that human beings are considered combustible objects. So, I don't know if people read that or saw that, but that was the first time I saw that article, and had it been mentioned to me, but
Yeah, we did have questions about that people had written in. We had testimony. People had written in questions asking, is that 5 feet rule for the propane heaters of combustible material supposed to be people as well? There was a lot of confusion on that.
Yeah, well, technically it is, unless you're wearing an asbestos suit. Even our proximity suits burn. Our fire department gear burns. It's merely a proximity suit that we wear into a building fire. So if we were to stand next to an open flame for more than a few minutes, our gear would start to burn. So yes, but I mean,
that was just one of those.
I know,
very obvious, but just thought I'd throw that out there,
yeah,
so that question could be answered.
I have one more thing about the DOT, if I may, and maybe you can help me out, or the DOT issue. We were told if a complaint is made about an awning from a structure attached to a building, in that situation, the DOB is to be notified. Or any impairment of the fire escape, the fire department is to be notified. So, I mean,
So if you get something about the awning, are you directing that then to DOB? Are you directing that individual who's called in, or? Right.
I mean, probably the call taker at complaints would, or if we arrive at the scene,
okay,
and that's their issue, and I said, well, this awning is illegally attached to the building. I think I go, well, I don't have jurisdiction. If it's impairing the fire escape, I do have jurisdiction. I don't have really any jurisdiction over a structure that's built in the street, unless someone's putting a propane heater inside of it.
Then it becomes your business.
Yes.
Got it. Other members of the committee with questions? I just want to be cognizant of time. It is 7:35, and I know that Kyle is only with us until 8:30, so I want to make sure that we're able to get to all everyone to have their questions answered as well. So if there are no other questions from the reopening working group committee, I will move on to other CB2 board members.
Can I just add one last quick thing? If people wish to ask me questions later or call me, I'm very open to that. I could give you my cell phone number and my email if you would like me to tell you what that is.
Sure, if you would like to share that here, that'd be great.
My email is D1 BISP Task Force at fdny.nyc.gov.
Okay.
My personal cell phone number is 347-906-4678. If you call or text, at 3 a.m., I may not get back to you. We'll do what we can.
Thank you. That's very kind of you, Captain Lynch. I'll share that in the chat in just a second. If I don't have any other questions from any other reopening working group committee members. I see that CB2 board member Lois Rakoff has a question.
Yeah, I have a question, but it doesn't have to do with the propane or the heaters. Can I ask the
That's fine.
question?
Sure.
Okay, this is what I've observed in the Bleecker area and other places, that the open dining in the roadbed and on the sidewalk, the outdoor structures have become enclosed to such a degree that not only do they have the, like, what a lean-to is, it's like 3 walls, the top, and now they're adding closed doors, and the heater is inside. And I was just curious how this is supposed to, the outdoor dining is supposed to prevent the contagion or reduce the contagion of the COVID virus. So if there's doors on them, what's the purpose of there's no aeration of any droplet infection, never mind COVID or a virus or bacteria. I'm a health person. So what's the purpose of the outdoor dining? And is that legal with closing the door, and then it encapsulates either 3 or 4 people, or even an entire roadbed area with maybe 10, 12, 15 people dining? That's my question.
I'll just take a
Any
quick
comments?
way to answer that. So I'll say that if they have a structure with 3 or more sides, it must be treated as indoor dining and follow all applicable guidelines for indoor dining. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's definitely
Good. Thank you.
A ubiquitous picture of the streetscape. But if restaurateurs take it upon themselves to add 3 or more sides to those roadbed structures, indoor dining.
And so it's considered indoor dining when they close the door, and then they put the heater inside.
We don't have specific guidelines on doors. We have guidelines on sides. If it's a 4-sided
Understandable. So have you
doors,
seen the doors?
I have, yes, I have seen some doors in and around.
It's like, okay, thank you very much. No comments from anybody else? Thank you.
Thanks, Lois. Carter, did you have some additional questions?
Yeah, we had an incident which happened in the 6th precinct, which was with respect to a car went through one of the outdoor dining areas that a lot of people had brought to my attention, and from talking to one of the community affairs officers at the 6th
On
precinct.
my block on Thompson Street, Carter.
That I was advised that there were 2 other incidences. Is DOT tracking those, and is there a reporting structure in place?
So yes, we are actively managing all related requests and incidents that come in related to open restaurants. One thing that all restaurants must comply with if they have roadway structures by December 15th is that they actually have to fill their structures with sandbags or water, what have you, in order to make that structure safer, especially in sort of the context of what you just described. That is a requirement no matter where you are in New York City. If you have a roadway structure in the parking lane, all 3 sides must be 18 inches wide, between 30 and 36 inches high, and completely filled with either sandbags or water or soil. DOT has actually been proactive, and the city has been proactive in providing these materials to restaurants free of charge. They've been distributing them over the last week. I'll drop in the comments or the chat for further information about that, but that's something that everyone has to comply with. And the last thing I will say to your point, Carter, is the way by which we're tracking this is that we're actually taking a look at all high crash corridors across the city and deploying yodocs, which are structures that fill with water, and then they have to be put on the side of the structure that's facing traffic So we've taken a look at all of our traffic data and identified high crash corridors, and we'll be distributing those over the coming days.
So we have 2 areas that I'm aware of where we have at least 2, and then there's some other participants in the Open Streets Restaurants program where the streets are wide enough or there's no parking in front, so that when the program is in effect, the establishments can set up dining on the roadbed. It would seem that those weighted barriers are not able to be done in a way that they can reasonably be moved in and out during those programs. And I was just wondering, you know, if you guys have taken that into consideration, or if it's an open streets program, if there's some sort of other guidelines for the barriers so that those restaurants continue to participate in the program and to use the space, you know, that they extend out into the street, you know, when they're allowed to, when the streets are closed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you're bringing up, the sort of design challenge that exists in the context of, you know, open restaurants, which allows for parking lane or curbside dining, and open streets restaurants, which is a full street closure, which in theory allows for added capacity. That is something that I manage the Open Streets Restaurants program, and that's something that I've noticed in sort of my observations, and I've flagged for the sort of working group that's in DOT for the permanent program for outdoor dining. So yeah, so I think that's a really great point that you're bringing up. I don't actually have a specific answer just yet, but it is something that's on our radar.
And then last question that I have just for clarification is with respect to the sidewalk structures, the structures that are actually built on the sidewalk itself. That's basically creating the indoor, enclosed sidewalk cafes. Are those governed? You know, those allowed under this program as it currently exists?
Well, as it pertains to, just so I understand what you're saying people or restaurants that build structures on the sidewalk, not ones that overhang from the parking lane into the sidewalk.
Correct. So specifically, exclusively on the sidewalk, not in the street. So as you know, we have a number of those, and that's been an open question for many people. And I think that there was a clear answer on one of the previous calls I was on, but I have not seen it referred to.
Yeah, I know this is not the answer that everyone's really going to be happy with, but I'm really going to defer this question to the Department of Buildings. I will read exactly what is in the bulletin that I shared, or that Valerie shared in the chats with everyone on the call. It says tents or other shelters that are on the sidewalk and or roadway where the restaurants are approved to be participating in the Open Restaurants program and have these structures that are less than 400 square feet, they require no further permitting by the Department of Buildings. So the way that I would read that is that structures that are under 400 square feet are permitted, but the Department of Buildings might have further guidance specific to that.
Thank you, Kyle.
And I don't think that we really, I will say that we don't really prefer any type of structure really on the sidewalk at all. Our strong preference, I would say, is for just loose furniture. Really what the Department of Transportation views structures as is maybe an umbrella or a tent, not a sort of permanent structure that a lot of buildings or that restaurants are creating right now. There's a little bit of, you know, there's the Department of Buildings regulations, and then there's the DOT regulations. And fire department, of course, too, has a say here as well. So that's, I will say, it's typically how we feel about sidewalk structures.
Kyle, can you just quickly, someone makes a complaint or a 311 complaint to DOT that gets referred to you. What happens to it? Can you just take us through, you know, what happens when a complaint, where should people file a complaint? And because I noticed that that now on certain 311 complaints that it now says, thank you for your report. It will be used to inform the city's ongoing work to ensure that New York's phased reopening is happening in a safe manner. So what happens when a complaint gets sent to DOT? Can you just walk us through what happens?
Yes. So when a complaint comes in, let's say, for example, via 311, we worked very closely with the 311 Help Center folks to identify specific issues that come up to open restaurants. At DOT, if it's related to open restaurants, it gets sent to our inspections team. And they immediately, honestly, usually same day, will send out a DOT inspector if the issue is related to something that is within our jurisdiction. And if not, it goes back into the 311 system and is referred to our other agencies, and they go about it and however they would manage the issue. So there's the way to make the complaints via 311. There's also the ability to make a complaint via the DOT Manhattan Borough Commissioner's Office. That's the folks who are usually on this call, who I'm filling in for tonight. I don't want to say either one is faster, but in terms of like the technology steps, maybe going through the Borough Commissioner's Office might make it go just a little bit quicker. And they have dedicated folks that, oversee issues just related to Manhattan and 311 requests and things like that. If you go to the DOT website, you can find out how to directly reach out to the Borough Commissioner's Office, or just, liaise with Jan, Jackie, or Jennifer, who are usually on the call.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And you kind of answered my follow-up question. So that's the same for, residents and operators. The same place of where they can see what the guidance is obviously the page you mentioned before. And as far as if I'm an operator and I have questions, I want to be in compliance, who am I calling? What am I doing?
If you're an operator, there is a SBS hotline that's been set up that fields all types of calls, and operators can call them and ask specific questions, and they can give you information directly on the line or refer you to the sort of specific area where that information is. They will also do actually consultations with you virtually, like over Zoom or FaceTime or some other way. So that's a great resource that is also available to any type of business that is interested in taking advantage of the slew of recovery tools that exist within New York City right now to help all types of small businesses. I will drop that phone number in the chat for everyone as well.
Perfect, thank you. Next, we're going to go to CB2 board member Michael Levine.
Hi, I have a quick question, and I believe it is directed to DOT, and I am addressing the issue of sidewalk clearance. Are the restaurants allowed to put tables adjacent to the restaurant building and at curbside, leaving less than 8 feet clearance between them to walk? Many of the locations I'm noticing, again, the tables are against the building at curbside and leaving far less than 3 feet sidewalk clearance in between. Is this legal? Is it illegal? And if we do find it, to whom do we complain?
Thank you for that question. I'll start by saying that an 8-foot clear path for pedestrians is universal on the sidewalk. That is a requirement no matter what situation is happening. That is by far the minimum clearance for pedestrians at all time, 8 feet. There is no dining on the sidewalk at the curb, no matter if you have roadway setups or if not. You can't put any loose furniture directly at the curb. Loose furniture for dining can only be directly adjacent to your building line. You can go as far out as it allows to maintain that 8-foot pedestrian clear path. But by no means are you able to put chairs at the curb. The 3 feet is the sort of guidelines as it pertains to adjacent businesses. So you're supposed to keep 3 feet from that business's nearest chairs, and they're supposed to keep 3 feet from your nearest chairs. So it's like, or your building line rather, sorry, not nearest chairs. So in its essence, it's at least 6 feet between the two setups for adjacent restaurants, if that makes sense. I know I explained it a little weird.
But again, you're required to have 8 feet of sidewalk clearance when you're passing by, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and complaints will go to DOT.
Yes, you can make complaints via 311 or the Manhattan Borough Commissioner's Office.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Michael. Really quickly, I noticed there's a lot of questions in the chat, and you're really missing out on an opportunity to we have several people on this panel who could be potentially seeing your question in the Q&A and answering it there directly right underneath. So please don't put questions in the chat. I know it's really easy to do, but again, we had asked for questions to be in the Q&A for them to be addressed. It'll also be much easier to follow up with the agencies to get your questions asked if it doesn't make it on air. So I just would like to say that really quickly. Also, Officer Rosado, if you're still with us, was wondering if you could give us an update on what you're seeing in the 5th precinct. And I know you're not sure how much longer you can be on here, and I just wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to share an update for us really quickly. If you're on.
Yeah, I'm on.
Okay.
Officer Rosado, 5th Precinct Community Affairs. I've seen some of the barriers pulled out into the street, and they have closed some of the streets off on days that weren't supposed to be closed. I have some guys that have gone out to the streets, and as well as myself, I've gone out there and I've put the barriers back out onto the sidewalk for the days that they are authorized. But if there's anything else that anyone else is seeing out there, other than that, they can reach out to me anytime, and I can try to help out with that kind of enforcement.
And Officer Rosado, when you're talking about the barriers and whatnot, you're talking about specifically streets where it's on the part of the Open Streets Restaurants program. Is that correct?
Correct. Any of the Open Streets programs, they only authorize certain times, hours of the day. People have put out the barriers when they're not supposed to, and we don't have a lot of time to just be on top of those barriers. But when we drive by and we do see them out in the street, we take them off the street and put them back on the sidewalk. That's the most we could do, unless we actually physically see someone putting them out there that we can actually know who it is.
Great. And Officer Rosado, if you could quickly, I know you're in the 5th precinct, if you could tell us what kind of complaint should the NYPD be receiving regarding open dining?
Some of the complaints we have received is people taking up parking spaces along those areas other than the actual enclosures. We've seen complaints like that, and they can reach out to us about people reserving spaces. I guess maybe owners and workers trying to reserve spaces next to those outdoor spaces. Also, people have reached out about loud noise karaoke. We have reached out to those businesses and told them they can't have amplified sound without a permit. If there's anything other than that, they can reach out to me. 5th Precinct. We cover Broadway to Allen, Houston to Chambers Street. They can reach out to me at rodney.rosado@nypd.org, and I'll take any emails when it comes to noise complaints, illegal parking, anything like that, also via email. But they can use the 311 system, and that's fine also.
Thank you for that.
No problem.
Thank you for that. We're going to go back to Bob Ely.
Yeah, just to follow up on the question dealing with the 8-foot on the sidewalk. For example, if that is happening and there's a complaint made and there's a DOT person that comes out to look it over and sees that it's not 8 feet, what happens? And then what happens at that point? And the same question then would be like, if the operator was going beyond the hours that permitted, say like midnight, and are there folks that come out and see that? And then what is the violation? I mean, under what law is there a violation, and is there a penalty?
So as it pertains to what happens when we send an inspector out, typically the first time that we go out, it's a little bit more of a light touch approach where we give restaurants 24 hours to, change anything that's not in compliance. And then they can submit photos back to the DOT just to prove that that they did in fact change their setup if there was something that needed to be changed. If there are restaurants that continue to flippantly just disregard the open restaurants or open streets restaurants guidelines, we are within our powers to send out cease and desist letters. And that usually sends a strong enough message to restaurants to get into compliance. And I'm sorry, will you repeat the second question that you had?
Yeah, under what, I mean, in other words, is there a law that gives you that ability to do that, to the cease and desist, or is that the only penalty, or are there steps in terms of enforcement? And I guess the basic stuff is, and also, do you have somebody working at night to come and look to see if they're still open at midnight?
So from a legal perspective, I don't feel the best to answer that particular question, but I'm sure that, yeah, we definitely do have inspections that occur mostly during the day. I think if we were to receive complaints about overnight issues, we would definitely try to respond to them. I feel like a lot of people might not necessarily be having outdoor dining at night since it's so visible, but I know that there's definitely been instances where people have secret indoor dining or indoor parties, whatever. That does not fall within DOT's jurisdiction, but if it was an outdoor dining situation that was going beyond 10 o'clock actually now, because I believe as of today, we're still in the 10 o'clock closure for restaurants, and they were still doing outdoor dining beyond 10 o'clock, you could make a complaint to DOT and we would definitely follow up as soon as possible.
And would the DOT be the best people to make that complaint to, at least through 311?
I assume, or NYPD if you felt like there was some social distancing issues or other things going on.
Thank you.
I don't know, NYPD can definitely corroborate that.
Thanks, Bob. I just want to quickly, if there's people that have just joined the call, this is the reopening working group meeting on open restaurants, and we have representatives from DOT, FDNY, and NYPD 5th Precinct. I'm going to go next to Bob Gormley, District Manager, CB2.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question regarding the structures that are being built on the sidewalks. And Captain Lynch, this is for you. We're seeing a fair number of them, these wooden structures that are being built under fire escapes. Are they illegal, period? Or is there some nuance there that we're not familiar with?
If the drop ladder would be impeded from the fire escape because of the awning or structure, yes, it's there's no ambiguity there. The structure would have to be altered or demolished. We would write a violation order. Most likely I would have to call a battalion chief to the scene, and maybe some people from fire prevention. It could be possible vacate of the building if people's secondary means of egress is impeded by that structure.
So are there standards for how wide the opening has to be, and the fact that it's a wooden structure, is that not relevant?
I'm not aware of any particular dimensions as far as that goes. Probably a rule of thumb would be if the firefighter could approach the building and put a portable ladder next to the fire escape, and just because most of the time, frankly, we don't use the drop ladder. It's a trade secret. We never use it. It's a dangerous, comes down like a guillotine half the time, and it's usually rusty or stuck. But if it impedes our ability to put a portable ladder next to it so people can descend from the fire escape, I would have to say, at least 5 or 8 feet would be needed to comfortably work with that ladder from that point. Does that answer your question at all, or?
I know more now than I did 3 minutes ago. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Captain Lynch. Donna?
Just a follow up to the 8-foot clearance. I'm curious if you do any sweeps around the neighborhoods to see if there's dining going on the curbside. I see it all over the place, and it just seems to me it's an easy thing to observe. And I'm wondering if you're going around and speaking to various restaurants that have all these chairs on the curbside.
Yeah, like I had mentioned at the beginning of the call, we are both proactive and a complaint-driven inspections SOP. So we definitely do sweeps in various parts of the city. I don't know exactly when we might have, visited a specific corridor in this community board, but we definitely do it. And then also complaint-driven. So if there are sort of pretty egregious just disregards for the guidelines, especially related to sidewalk clearance, you can relay that information to 311 or the Manhattan Borough Commissioner's Office.
Great, thank you. David Gruber, CB2 board member. David? David, we can't hear you. Do you want to type your question in the chat? We can also try you in a few minutes as well. All right. Next, I don't see if there are no other questions from any other committee members or CB2 board members, we will move to the public. As I mentioned, we're going to start with operators who have questions. So if your hand is raised and you do not operate a eating and drinking establishment in CB2, please lower your hand. I'd like to hear from operators first. If there are any operators that are on the call that would like to have a question asked. You can also put it in the Q&A as well. David, I still, just checking in. No, okay. All right, seeing that there are no, well, hold on. Again, are there any, I'm looking for operators that have their hands raised. I don't think Catherine Quinn is an operator. If anyone else wants to correct me on that. All right, I'm gonna move to residents that have questions. And I'd like to, so please raise your hand and we will call on you and allow you to speak. There will not be video. If there are any, if this starts to turn into testimony about a specific venue, we will turn your mic off. So this needs to be questions only and no statements. Thank you. First, we'll call on Catherine Quinn.
Hi there, thank you. My question is for Captain Lynch. Hi, Captain Lynch, thank you very much. I'm very happy that you and your people are trying to take care of us. Based on what the information you've given us, the 10 feet from the front of a building, the 8 foot from the curb, I would guess there are almost no restaurants in the West Village with propane heaters that are legal. Do you have any suggestions? By the way, these operators have other options. They could have electric heaters. Is there any way we can enforce their getting rid of these illegal propane heaters?
Yeah, it's been our concern from the very beginning. It's a great question. I mean, it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's the Apollo 13 scenario. It's like an impossibility almost to do everything legally, just given the physical limitations for the most part. I'm sorry, is your neighborhood in Greenwich Village or?
West Village. Hi, I'm in the West Village.
Oh, West Village, excuse me. Oh yeah, we had a big fire over there just the other day. We're trying to our first approach to this was education and outreach, and and being as civil and nice as we possibly could. We try to explain to people the hazards and what what are your intentions? A lot of times you didn't have anything out in the street. He goes, are you using electric? Or you plan to use propane? And we would get, well, we haven't really decided. We're looking into it. But now, of course, we're seeing them as you are in your neighborhood. So as I mentioned earlier, we are writing violations. We're giving them the violation gives them a chance to fix it, to redeem themselves. They can either abide by the regulations as far as clearance and proper permits and operation, or they can't, and a repeat violation results in a very serious fine. It's, as I say, it's a $5,000 fine per incident. And we don't want to hurt someone's livelihood, but we are very, as I mentioned earlier, the hazard with propane is not just, and this is a very real scenario. A person not a patron of the restaurant could be smoking a cigarette, walking through the dining area, whether it's on the street or the sidewalk, and just drop a cigarette, and a leaking tank would ignite. There's no way we can control that. We can't control the person, with the cigarette walking through the restaurant, even though no smoking, of course, is not permitted. So we're using the enforcement tools that we have. The violation order is the first one. It kind of gives them a chance to fix it and make it right. We are encouraging the use of electric heaters. Electric kind of really falls under DOB, and it's much more benign. It's not hazardous. Another option is natural gas, properly piped by a licensed plumber. But we're not seeing that many people investing in that option. I don't know why. I mean, I don't know if it's electric bills or if it's electrical equipment is so expensive. I don't know the reason why they wouldn't, because they are risking huge fines. And so we are doing the best we can. I have a very small team, and but the more complaints we get, the more the word's going to get out. Once one or two restaurants get their tanks confiscated or fines, I think the word should spread, that they should look for another option.
Well, thank you. And I think your advice then, as I hear it, is that we should repeatedly call these complaints into you.
Yes. The complaint process, as I mentioned, was that number. I'm sure there is a 311 option as well. 911, if you really think it's an imminent hazard to life and property, then you call 911. I mean, we can't stop you from doing that. We would, we don't like 911 used for cat up the tree calls, of course, but if you smell gas, or if you see someone's carelessly moving tanks around, or there's smoking going on next to where propane, that's a 911 call, in my opinion. If you see people, patrons or otherwise, smoking in that area, I would call 911, because that's it's an ignition hazard right there.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. And by the way, let me just say, I think the New York Fire Department is our only hope here. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Before we go to the next question, just really quickly, Captain Lynch, how long is the mayor's executive order on propane heaters? What's that duration of that period that those are allowed? Will you just remind everyone?
That's a great question. I wish I had the exact answer. My understanding is it is May, June, whenever it starts getting warm. I think they really want to try to help the restaurant industry as far as we know. I would say this though, that again, and this is another complaint thing. I kind of put in the chat about the tanks being on the street, even if the street is closed to traffic. Tanks and heaters are never permitted to be on any roadway at any time, on any street, whether it's closed to traffic or not. And add to that is weather. If it's a very, very windy day, rainy day, snowy day, they can't be used. They cannot be used. And we would, if they're again flagrant about it, we would confiscate the tanks and shut down the operation.
Great.
So that's another basis for a complaint.
Okay. I mean, more of my question, that's very, very helpful and very insightful. More of the question is, next November, will propane heaters be allowed? At this
Next
point?
year, I would say not. I mean, I would think that when things improve, when we have when the vaccine is readily available and people are getting well and economy's opening up and herd immunity occurs, however that is decided, when things are back to normal, as our leaders like to say, I would think that we would try to dismiss the program, but I don't have maybe Ms. Sanchez has better, I don't know. I don't know the whole optics on it, but my understanding is this is a temporary
Perfect.
order.
That's what I wanted.
That it is, that outdoor dining is permanent but I think that order can be rescinded. And I will say this off the record. I mean, if we have a major fire or incident, I think it will permanently shut down the use of propane for outdoor dining. And we're just, that's the one thing. It's just keeping us up at night that someone's going to be careless, whether, and we're going to have a major incident. So we're begging the restaurant owners to really consider, if they have to use these things, to be extremely careful and have competent people operating. So
Thank you. David, I see that your hand's raised, but I'm going to ask if your question's not for Kyle at DOT. I'm gonna ask you to wait because I want to get to as many people in the public. Okay. So next, we'll ask Stuart Waldman. And again, if your hand is raised and if you have a DOT related question, if you could let me know in the chat and we'll call on you sooner than the order, just because I know that Kyle is only with us until 8:30. So if you have a DOT related question and your hand is raised, I'm gonna ask, I'd like you to have an opportunity to do that. So if you can put in the chat whether or not your question is DOT related. Otherwise, I'm gonna ask Stuart Waldman.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if this is for DOT. I wouldn't know who handles this. But the noise from a street roadway restaurant is the same as a noise from an indoor restaurant, only it's on the street. So I know when we have noise complaints for restaurants inside, the doors are open and it's noisy, somebody comes with an audiometer and measures the decibels. Does an agency do that for these outdoor restaurants? Because the one on every side street on the weekend is certainly in violation of the New York City noise code. I don't know who's in charge of noise.
Kyle, do you have anything you can add on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, amplified sound is not within the DOT's enforcement.
I'm not talking about amplified sound.
Or sound complaints of.
So who is?
I would assume NYPD.
Okay. I don't know if we still have Evren or Rodney. Can you answer the noise complaint issue for us? All right, we're gonna move on to the next question. We will get that answered. Thank you.
Yeah, Rodney Rosado, 5th
Okay.
Precinct. Yeah, noise complaints come in through 311 to the NYPD. Right now, we use the Department of Environmental Protection to enforce it and do the decibel reading if we don't have anybody on hand. Anything specific?
We're actually not asking for a specific venue. We actually don't want questions about a specific venue. Just want to know what the process is for that. So you answered it perfectly. Thank you, Officer Rosado.
No problem.
Next, Augustine Hope.
Hi, I have two questions, actually. I hope I can ask them both. First off, I guess it's a question for Kyle. It does sort of look like your department is in charge of this open restaurants program, and yet you seem to be completely unable to speak to any of these issues. Who is or who should be in charge overall of this program? Because it doesn't seem to be working, having multiple different agencies like FDNY who feel sort of in a very difficult place, the DOB that just doesn't turn up. Should anybody be in charge of this entire program?
First of all, I would like to also remind everyone that we're not looking to make personal attacks to anyone on the panel. They are giving their time.
No personal attacks. That was not a personal attack.
And you are asking him to speculate, but Kyle, I'll let you speak for.
I think that you're definitely addressing some definitely challenges related to the existing program. One thing I really want to underscore and make sure that everybody knows is that DOT, we had never done this before. This is the first time that we ever put this together, and we were asked to do something to really save businesses who were facing really, really dire situations. And is the exact sort of guidelines and all the sort of specifications perfect? I mean, I think that this conversation is really shedding light on some of the things that need to be unpacked a little bit more as we develop what is eventually going to be a permanent program. You know, one thing I think to note is that also everything that exists right now related to the regulations might not necessarily be the regulations in the permanent program. Your question about who should maintain it or who should run this program, I mean, I don't necessarily know, because city government is a highly collaborative environment, and we really do rely. The fire department is, I think, given everyone, even I learned a lot tonight about the sort of fire code related to heating and things like that. So we really look to our city agency experts to help. So inevitably it's going to be a sort of collaborative effort amongst lots of different agencies. Who will be the sort of hub of all these many spokes in the future is to be determined. It looks like DOT is at least going to be at the reins to start, but we are of course in the last year of the mayoral administration, and we'll have a new mayor in 2022. So the future is still unclear. I don't necessarily know, but I think that you're bringing up really valuable points.
Okay, so I'll assume you're at the reins for the moment. So let me ask you a question about these buildings that are going up on the roadways, the sidewalks, and against the buildings. You referred that back to DOB earlier, but you also said, as far as you know, these are permitted under the DOB guidelines for tents and other structures. I don't think there's any reference to wood-framed semi-permanent structures which are going up. So I guess the first question about that is, are there any guidelines that you guys have issued to allowing these kind of structures? Because there's nothing that I've seen in the guidelines for any kind of structure other than platforms with planters around it in the roadway, and nothing on the sidewalks. And I am pretty damn certain that these, excuse my language, but all these structures on the sidewalk at least require, in our area, DOB permits, which means plans, CB2 hearings, DOB permits, inspections, LPC hearings, and so on and so forth. And I talked to the people who are putting up these structures around us, and not one of them has got a permit, any one of these permits. Okay, so that's a major problem. And when asked why they don't, they say, well, because nobody else has one. Now, they're absolutely right about that. So who is going to make sure that these guys get permits, that these places are safe? And then the final question on that is, I'm sorry, a lot of questions, but do you see these wood frame structures as becoming permanent? Are they part of the open restaurant program?
I don't know as it pertains to structures. Once again, all the questions that you're asking is the Department of Buildings jurisdiction. I'm just unfortunately not in a position to really offer up guidance on some of the issues that you're asking. DOT makes no sort of specifications or guidelines on structures. Like I said, our our perspective on this is that people were going to use tents and umbrellas. Of course, as we all have seen, a lot of restaurants have created semi-permanent structures to a degree. And you know, we are still in close coordination with the fire department, with the Department of Sanitation, SBS, and all of our other agencies as to best, you know, what's the best way to sort of unpack these issues and make sure that they're not persistent in the future. But I know structures is definitely an ongoing challenge. And I know that probably there's gonna be a lot of questions about it tonight. And you know, I only have a few minutes left tonight, but I will say that I think just moving forward in this evening as it pertains to structures, you really should just reference everything back to the DOB. And I really wish that they were here to fill in some of the gaps, but that's what I'm gonna say on that.
Thank you, Kyle. And thank you, Augustin. We're gonna move on next to Leslie Clark. And again, we only have Kyle for the next 8 minutes. So Leslie, if you could keep it to one question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. All right. I think one of the things that we've heard repeatedly this evening is that different aspects of this program are being handled by different agencies, and therefore many things from the perspective of a resident seem to fall between the cracks. I wanted to ask about social distancing. The fact is we have on the streets, many in my neighborhood, there is nobody who has 8-foot passage for pedestrians, virtually no one. So that is a question of social distance. That is, I always have to pass in less than 8 feet from people. I also frequently have to pass through structures that are on the street, which have now completely enclosed the sidewalk. So that means I'm walking through a restaurant where, again, social distancing is no longer possible, nor is it under my
question, Leslie, if we could just get to
my question, I'm setting the frame for this, which is, who is going to ensure that we have social distancing, and to whom do I complain when I don't get that?
I'm sorry, I unfortunately do not have the answer to that specific question. I don't necessarily know who is the enforcement power related to social distancing. As it pertains to 8-foot clear paths, that definitely falls within DOT's enforcement jurisdiction. So you can refer those restaurants via 311 or the Manhattan Borough Commissioner's Office. You know, social distancing beyond the placement of tables and chairs is definitely something that we'll have to get back to you on.
Thank you, Leslie. Nancy?
Yes, thank you very much. As long as Mr. Gorman is still here, I have to share my my friend's issues about there being no central place to complain, but I realize you can't do that. I really wanted to speak to Captain Lynch, and I want to thank you, Captain Lynch, for coming down this evening and explaining this in detail. I will say that before this evening, I was apprehensive about the propane. Now I am terrified. I can see that you're a nice guy. I really like nice guys. We don't have enough of them. But I guess I can put this as a question. What will it take to get you out of the nice guy mode and into really some severe talking to for virtually everybody in the West Village who is out of compliance before we have a major incident? Because
Sorry, I don't hate to cut you off. I've just got Kyle for another 5 minutes. Can I please call on you next to have Captain Lynch answer this?
Sure.
Thank you. I'll get right back to you.
Thank you.
Michelle Campo, is your question related to DOT?
Hear me?
Yes. Is your question for Kyle at DOT?
Why, as he was trying to respond to who to, make a complaint to, because there is no oversight. There is no enforcement that anybody's seen? Anybody?
If you have a specific question for Kyle, if not, I will need to move on. I'm just going to check with the other people who have their hands raised to see if they have a question for Kyle, because I only have him for 4 more minutes.
Well, is it possible to get some enforcement on the ADA compliance? How's that?
As it pertains to making sure that clear paths and sort of pedestrian ramps exist for roadway structures, we are happy to enforce those. We are in full support of the ADA and we take it very seriously. So if you do see any businesses that are in non-compliant as it pertains to accessibility, definitely refer those via 311 or the Manhattan Borough Commissioner's Office.
Almost all are non-compliant, and when you call 311, they say, thank you, we'll get around to it. So nobody is getting back to anybody.
And Kyle, is the Manhattan Borough Commissioner's Office, that's in DOT, and is that number readily available on the site? I can pull it and put it in the chat, but just wanted to just be clear on that.
Yeah, so there's like a 212 number. Actually, I'm just going to pull it up and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
There's a 212 number and an email for a web form that you can use. So there's multiple ways to contact them.
Okay.
So I'm going to put the phone number first and then the actual web page.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Next, I'm going to ask Elizabeth Sabo if your question is related to the DOT. Again, I just have Kyle.
Yes. Hi. I just want a quick question for Kyle. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Do you think, since we're all talking about this lack of orchestration between agencies, and DOT is the sponsor of this program, Kyle, do you think DOT can champion perhaps naming a czar, something like this, who will oversee the communication between everybody? Is that possible? Is that a good idea?
I mean, anything is possible, really. But I think really, and what already exists is sort of the centralized entity that governs all the agencies is the mayor's office. And that's sort of the intermediary between us and all the agencies that are involved here. The mayor's office has really been working with us in close coordination as we've needed involve the Department of Sanitation, Fire Department, things like that. So I imagine that sort of level of coordination will continue to exist, because I think that's in a lot of ways what the mayor's office is meant to do.
Kyle, I have one more question. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your question. I'm going to ask Kyle one last question that's in the Q&A that's directed at you. If you just will hang with me for one more minute. Are DOT guided street outdoor dining structures allowed to build roofs that extend from their street bed location all the way across the sidewalk to the building they face?
That is a question, once again, I'm just going to refer back to the Department of Buildings for their guidance on. But, similar to what Greg from FDNY said, that if it's blocking a fire escape or any sort of egress for emergency access, I think that is a definite no. There's no sort of ifs, ands, or buts about it, but I've seen it a little bit in pictures. So DOB is definitely going to be the one to answer the question there.
Thank you so much, Carl, and thank you again for joining us this evening. And one more question. Sorry, one more. I know we're right on the half hour. How do we know how prior complaints have been addressed when a condition persists?
So all of the inspections related to the inspections that DOT does for open streets or for open restaurants, are available on open data. Before I leave, I'll just pull that and throw that in the chat so everyone can download that. It's just available as a spreadsheet, and you can search by every sort of indicator you could ever want, by community board, by elected districts, name, what have you. So I'll throw that in the chat so people can get a better idea as to what level of inspections are. You can, I am sure if there were any restaurants on the call tonight, they will say and probably complain about the number of times that a city agency actually inspects them. That is probably one of the biggest complaints that I hear is how much inspections that happens. A lot of times people sometimes get inspected twice in one day. So I want to really just say to everyone on the call tonight is that DOT takes all of these issues very seriously. And we think that you all are bringing really valuable feedback to the table here. And we're really looking forward to using that to inform the future open restaurants and open streets programs. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kyle. Have a good evening. Again, I'm going to get back to Nancy in just 1 second, but I also just want to reiterate that we did invite the Department of Buildings to join us on this call. They did not send a representative, so we will see if we can perhaps hold something in the future that's focused on DOB related questions. So I'm going to go to Nancy now.
Thank you, Valerie. I think I did ask my question or my comment, which is to urge Captain Lynch to, I would say, would you please do some more sweeps in the West Village and in Soho in the CB2 area, because we are told, and I certainly believe it, that this area has the highest concentration in the entire city of the outdoor dining. And I'm glad you have seen a couple restaurants in propane compliance. I have not seen any. I have filed a lot of complaints. Sandra has probably seen some of them. And there's many, many more. And it's it is something very bad is going to happen. I'm very much afraid on my street, on somebody's street, and there's going to be. We need an ounce of prevention is what we need, or maybe a pound of prevention.
Thank
because
you, Nancy. I want to make sure that we give the proper time to Captain Lynch to answer your initial question.
Thank you, Valerie.
So what you're asking is if we're doing enforcement or more enforcement in that area. So yes, it is coincidental, I guess, that my division office is located in Soho, and we've noticed that I didn't realize it working in the area for so many years that we had so many restaurants and what we call the second battalion. That's our nomenclature for our districting of the city. So yeah, we will make an effort. I had to survey the entire division. I'm responsible from 42nd Street all the way down to the financial district and Seaport. So, this program kind of came, we were told to start the task force sweeps November 30th, which doesn't, not that long ago. And so I've been trying to survey our division, our area. As I mentioned today, we were in the Midtown area. We didn't have too many problems up there. And we know there are problems downtown, down by us in particular. Little Italy, parts of Chinatown, the West Village, Tribeca. We know they're there, and we're working on it. We have a very limited staff, but we're doing our best. And I can't emphasize it enough to encourage you to use the tools we've used about registering complaints with whether it's through 311, the fire department complaint number we posted, I think, right, Valerie, and last resort 911. Will come. We will come, but we will shut it down if it's a dangerous condition.
Thank you, Captain.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your question, Nancy, as always. I'm going to move next to CB2 board member David Gruber.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
When I got elevated caught in my audio went crazy. I just want to first recognize that Officer Can from the 6th Precinct is at this meeting. And besides Officer Rosado from the 5th. And this is for Captain Lynch and or the PD. On the restaurant streets, open streets for restaurants, I don't see space for an ambulance or a fire truck to get through. Some restaurants say to me, oh, you know, we'll move it if a fire engine has to come by or an ambulance. It seems like crazy. How do we get emergency vehicles down some of these streets? And anybody who wants it, Captain Lynch, you could grab it, or someone from the PD. I'm disturbed.
I was taught a phrase a long time ago by one of my chiefs, and I asked him a similar question. And the answer was, you do the best you can. And I don't mean to be flippant about it, but you know, a lot of we're a can-do job, and my brothers in the PD are the same. You know, we get in, we walk in if we have to. I mean, you know, some of our rigs are very difficult to navigate down the streets anyway. I think the first snowstorm is really going to be a big test for us when there's a building fire or an EMS call, as you mentioned.
So when the street is completely gated off, that's not in violation of anything? When there's no space given for a vehicle, emergency vehicle to get through? I don't get it, to be honest with you.
Well, I think the police could probably answer that, but we would certainly move a barrier if it's physically able to be moved, to move a fire truck down the block. And I used to work in the financial district, and we responded to Wall Street all the time. It's a very sensitive, barricaded area. We had to go through, you know, electronic barriers, security barriers, and then the men physically got off the rigs, pulled the other barriers, and then we get back on and then continue down the street. That's what it takes. That we do whatever it takes to get down the block. But as far as enforcement, obviously that falls under the police.
Hi, Dave. Evram Can, 6th Precinct Community Affairs.
Hi, Evram.
Hi. I just want to jump on and say that, you know, when the program first started, the barriers didn't come from precinct level. So they were, I guess they were like a part of the whole restaurant street, play street, or, you know, open street. The concept itself had barriers at all the intersections, obviously, to stop vehicles from making the turn down and obviously hitting people. Yes, some of the blocks I do notice, like Cornelia Street is probably the narrowest. Yeah, it's a little tight. Although I have done like a random visit with lights on just to see if someone does come out and move the barriers. And both times someone came out and moved the barriers. So I was pretty surprised. And I know in the beginning that some of the restaurants were putting tables in the street, restricting that safety lane that the DOT required the permit holder or the participants to maintain. And you know, I'm not going to mention the restaurant name, but the permit holder on Cornelia was very compliant, and she made the appropriate phone calls to make sure nobody else puts tables there. Now, I haven't heard any complaints, so I don't know if tables are back in the street, but as far as I know, there are none blocking the lane. But yes, it is tight. So I do
say
agree
that
with
because I saw an ambulance trying to get through a street the other day, and it gave up and it went down another route. And I just don't know. It broke my heart to see somebody in an emergency ambulance having to take an alternate route to the hospital. So I'm just disturbed at that. Anyway, thank you all for answering my question.
Thanks, David. Officer Cannon, Officer Rosado, a question about from the Q&A. It says, we've noticed the opposite problem with the barriers that close the streets. Drivers move barriers, and then it becomes a street with car traffic. Does NYPD enforce this?
Officers out of 5th Precinct. Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. We have a question in the Q&A that says, we've noticed the opposite problem with barriers that close the street. Drivers move the barriers, and then it becomes a street with car traffic. So the barriers are moved by a driver to let their car through, and then they don't get out of their car again and move the barrier back. So it becomes a street with traffic.
Yes.
How does NYPD enforce that?
Yeah, we do enforce it. The problem is this can happen at any intersection, at any open street area, and there's so many that we don't have a permanent officer on site to watch this when it happens. So we usually tell the business owner just reclose the street. If you see somebody open it, we tell them not to confront the person because we don't want that kind of issue. Just close it again. If there's a further problem or a conflict, just call 911. We'll come by. We'll close the street again. In reference to the last statement about ambulance and firefighter lanes in the 5th precinct, I inspect these on a regular basis. Every street is open, and we do have that lane of that emergency lane for fire department and NYPD to travel through. There is one block that we have. I won't say which business. I'm sorry, hold on. I can't say which business right now, but one of the businesses does put out foldable chairs on that block, but we haven't had an incident yet where the fire department can't travel through. And we do leave enough space over the sidewalk where an ambulance, firefighters, or NYPD can travel around and still get onto the block without having to jump out of the car and waste precious seconds trying to get to a fire or an emergency condition.
Okay.
Here, I just want to jump on, obviously, Kansas 6 Precinct Community Affairs. Here in the West Village, with our restaurant streets and our open streets, almost every single one of ours, I have a very close relationship with the permit holder or the restaurant that's managing the block. And, the rules are they're responsible for those barriers. If someone moves it, they got to put it back. And I'm pretty strict with that stuff. And, I had an issue on Cornelia Street a few months back. That was corrected. Someone did put a barrier out when it wasn't supposed to be out. And I didn't get mad at all the restaurants. I got mad at the permit holder because I hold the permit holders responsible for that stuff.
Great, thank you. Officer Can, while we still have you, could you give us an update on the 6th precinct? Just any sort of update in general about what's going on? That would be great. Sorry for not getting you earlier.
Okay. So in terms of the restaurant stuff, or
yeah,
okay. In terms of restaurant stuff, lately it's been pretty good. I haven't been getting crazy amount of complaints. In the beginning, there were a couple blocks where we were getting the complaints from, and we were able to work with the people who hold the permits and really correct the conditions. And I'm sure there's still some residents that are not happy with what's going on, and with certain things or certain layouts that the restaurants may have. But for now, I think it's pretty good. And as far as we are concerned at precinct level, there's really not much we could do on our end at this point. I'm pretty satisfied with what I see out there. I don't see anything crazy. But then again, if something's brought to our attention, we do go out and we do check it out to make sure everything's okay.
Thank you, Officer Can. And what are the complaints that you can be the most effective on, that NYPD can be the most effective on? Like the best use of your resources. What are the best complaints for residents or operators to reach out to you with in regards to open restaurants?
Well, it's kind of tough because we're working with the residents and with the businesses, so it's like we're kind of playing like the middle people here. And as far as sidewalk clearance and illegal structures and stuff, yeah, we can help out, or maybe we could make a referral to the DOT or tell the complainant to call 311. We just want to make sure that the street is clear, that someone in a wheelchair can get by on the sidewalk, that there's no serious safety hazards. In the beginning we were finding these things, and some of the restaurants were correcting them, some weren't. One restaurant in the beginning gave us a hard time, and they kind of learned the hard way. But other than that, right now we'll field any of the complaints and we'll forward them to the appropriate parties.
Thank you so much, Officer Cam, for that update and for answering that question. We're going to now move into business session. So with that, to the committee, we heard a lot here tonight. I'm just curious what you think about what we heard tonight. If anyone would like to start.
I just wanted to jump in and say, if people still have ongoing questions, they can contact the Community 2 board office and speak with our district manager, Bob Gormley. So if you've got ongoing specific issues, we can assist with helping you follow up on that.
All right. I'd mentioned, there was a lot of questions that we got tonight that it would have, as we all know, and we did ask for DOB to be here. So I'm just curious if there are other agencies that the committee thinks we should do separate sessions with or do another thing like this. There were some people are wondering if there were other agencies that we should be reaching out to. So again, just looking for comments from the committee.
And some people had put in, Valerie, to do LPC for some of these structures. It might be, too soon to do that. I don't know. I think most important would just get DOB in here and get some answers.
Yeah, that does sound like the most immediate one. I'm going to ask a quick clarification. Bob Gormley, District Manager, you had put Office of Special Enforcement in the.
We were told by the Mayor's Community Affairs Office that they had confirmed attendance, but they didn't show. And that they're going to be one. My understanding is they're going to be one of the lead agencies regarding some enforcement issues. I don't know what those issues are, but so it would have been nice to have them here.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, we did have confirmation from the mayor's office that we would have someone from the mayor's office of special enforcement, and that is right. As Bob said, that enforcement, there is going to be a shift at some point. So yes, it would have been nice. And perhaps we'll do some follow up there. Thank you for that, Bob.
And if they do revert to eliminating indoor dining, if the governor does do that, as he indicated this morning, that's in his, for lack of a better word, toolbox right now, and something that he's considering potentially doing on Monday. One of the things that I haven't heard anybody speak to, but I think given some of the activity in Staten Island, that we can look to the state doing enforcement on structures that are totally enclosed, because that's something that the governor has done to date, and that's something that, if we have any resources or any information, we can probably fill people in. But I have a feeling we'll start to see that on the news, because they do take those violations of the state's instructions fairly seriously. And I think the Sheriff's Department, New York City Sheriff's Department, has been doing that enforcement. So that's a whole nother layer of a potential enforcement activity if indoor dining is ended and people are dining in the outdoor structures.
Kind of how that percentage, like whether or not an outdoor structure is considered indoor dining versus not, and how is that going to be determined and how that's going to be enforced, correct?
Well, if a structure is closed on more than two sides, it will be considered indoor dining and therefore open. It's fairly clear, right? I mean, we're talking about how many people you can have in there if indoor dining is allowed, but it will become very clear if indoor dining is not allowed and you have more than two sides up. That would be the enforcement. Now, I'm hoping that some operators have the opportunity to take down some of those sides so they can continue their outdoor dining programs, but it's important. That's an important distinction for businesses to really understand. And, maybe that's something that we can find out from DOB and get some clarification, or from Kyle. I hadn't thought to ask him that question, but that's an important for our local businesses to understand, if they can transition back to be being in full compliance with those regulations.
Carter, can you clarify? You said 2 sides. I mean, most outdoor
Right.
dining, they all have 3 sides. Some of them have 4 sides.
That's right. So the DOT guidelines say that to be considered outdoor dining, they need to, only 2 sides can be covered and they can't be parallel. So you can have an end. So one side along the roadbed, for example, needs to be open. I think they can make a choice of either one and only one end, or excuse me, one of the 2 sides can be closed, but not forming a sort of an L shape, but they can't form a U shape, or they can't be parallel to each other. And otherwise it becomes indoor dining.
It's a state reg, Carter?
It's a DOT guideline as far as I know. So, the important thing is just, we want to make sure people know how to come into compliance, right? And get this information out, because that's, as everybody here has seen, the state enforcement is fairly significant.
Can I say something, Valerie?
I mean, we're in business session, but
Oh, I thought this was a joint committee. Sorry.
no.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. You can put it in the chat. Thank you.
Other issues that we've heard about from the community is sanitation. So if we're going to bring more people to the table, just talk about how restaurants, if it does continue for outdoor dining, how to respect neighbors and not put trash outside of other retail stores. I mean, I think it's important to hear from the Department of Sanitation to find out how they're handling it as well.
That's a great point, Dan. I also, in thinking of what I did not get to ask Kyle, was about existing large capital construction or street construction projects that I know there was something I received in an email and a photo of a street being milled over, I think in Soho, where the outdoor dining that was not happening. So basically this mismatch of these really expensive DOT projects are happening as these structures are kind of living there. And so what does that mean for street improvements that are supposed to pave the entire street, et cetera? Just as a thought. Bob Ely?
Yeah, I agree with Dan 100%. I think that was a good suggestion. I think one thing that we constantly learn when we have meetings like this, and there were so many people and there was so much information that was provided, phone numbers, and it really, email addresses and links to how to complain. This is a complaint-driven city, and it all does kind of come down to that. Yes, it does come down to enforcement as well. But it's just kind of the way that things work, and it's unfortunate because I think most people don't want to complain, but it does seem very clear that that's what I mean. I hate to say it, that's what we heard tonight was bring a complaint. This is how you do it, and because I do think there's so many people in our neighborhoods who are really upset, upset by the statement by city council and by the mayor that this is going to be permanent. And I think just listening to the captain talk about it in practical terms, that it's temporary. This is because of the pandemic. I mean, I think that's really the important issue. And if we are complaining, is this temporary? Are we complaining about temporary things, or are we complaining about permanent things? I think people that are really upset are using it because they're concerned about it being permanent, and that there be a lack of standards if it does become permanent in the way that it currently exists. And the one thing that I took out of tonight that was deeply concerning to me is these propane heaters. And so of course, there's probably no way to really do it in a legal, safe manner. And that's why they were not permitted before the pandemic. And they're only being permitted now because we're in a dire situation. So I guess the question that I have is, what are the alternatives to these gas heaters? And I say gas, I mean propane. And so should we not be promoting other means to heat and to keep the businesses from, to have the outdoor dining because of what's taking place now? I mean, now we're going into December. Okay, so it's getting really cold. So even a propane heater is not going to help. But at some point here in February, if we're still trying to get out of this, these propane heaters are going to come back into March. And, it's the danger aspect of it. And that gives us a few months to try to maybe there's got to be other alternatives. So I'll stop on that. Okay.
Thank you for that, Bob. You bring up a really great point. And, kind of makes you want to ask the committee, do we want a reso? Do we need a reso here on the heaters? I know this is, again, intended to be about the enforcement across all, but a lot of the conversation and a lot of that is because of Captain Lynch's great answers and insight. I certainly learned a whole lot, and I like to think that I'd known a lot going in this, and I certainly did not. So I'd like to hear any comments on, do we want a reso here, focusing on propane heaters, and so I'm going to pose that question to the committee.
It did sound from Captain Lynch, Bob, that he didn't think that these heaters are going to be permanent. He kind of made a comment. So if we did write a resolution, we'd want to support that and say we welcome the time and even quoting him and support that we don't think it should be permanent until there's actually more community involvement.
Thank you for that, Dan. Yeah, I understand what he said about that, and I agree with you. It's just, I guess, if the roadway seating is what's becoming permanent eventually, propane heaters aren't allowed in the roadway seating anyway. So I guess I'm just thinking out loud here. So then I'll kind of go bigger and ask the committee, is there an overall follow-up to this of what we heard over everything? In terms of, is it a letter following up on the resolution we passed last month, highlighting this new information? Just kind of going to throw that out there.
What is that? I mean, the mayor's office wasn't here. You didn't have Department of Buildings here. And there was a comment that we've mentioned before, which is about some kind of a SAR that's in charge of this outdoor dining. That actually brings all the agencies together. And had we heard from the mayor's office, maybe we would have heard that the mayor's office is actually doing that wrangling, because Captain Lynch and the NYPD can't handle it all on their own. They need some kind of SAR. And that's something that I think we've heard of over and over again.
Good point, Dan. We did invite Andrew Kunk back from the mayor's office, but unfortunately, due to the furloughs, he was on furlough today. As we're starting to see that affect more of the agencies that we interact with. But you bring up a really excellent point. Does anyone else want to speak to that?
I agree. I think, Valerie, that not having one person for everybody to go to, I feel like we're still in the same position that we were last time we were asking questions or trying to find out. We learned nothing new, and the propane heaters at least seem to be the one thing that everybody knows who's responsible for, and they seem to be very much on top of that. So having one place to go for everybody, for the businesses, for the residents, I think is real important and something to push for. And the other, aside from the propane heaters, that 8-foot clearance space, all the seating on the curbside, one of the number one complaints that keep coming in is that people cannot pass down the sidewalk. And why it's dependent on everyone in the neighborhood to consistently call out such a blatant not paying attention to a simple rule, it is really beyond me. I don't know what we say about that, but I mean, it's just basic. You don't have to measure, you don't have to anything. If there's a table on the curbside, it shouldn't be there. It's that simple. So.
And just to Donna's point, you know, if they want to change the rules, they should change the rules, but otherwise they should be enforcing the rules that they have. Because we are all wasting a tremendous amount of time discussing this issue simply because it's not being enforced. It's you can casually observe it. It's not complicated. And if they want to make some exceptions, then they should write that into the rules wherever that may be able to occur. It's clear why the restaurants are doing it, because they can then have spacing between the tables. And, you know, they're using the passageway as spacing between the tables. And if that's what the city wants to allow, then change the rules. But otherwise, enforce the rules. And the confusion and just the amount of time and the angst that this is creating is really eats up a tremendous amount of time, you know, and resources from at least, you know, our district manager certainly spends a lot of time on this. And, you know, I think that's something that we should comment on, that the rules should be written to be what, you know, enforceable.
Thanks, Carter. Joe, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I agree with that. What everyone's saying. I think we're really just in need of some sort of, czar or something. I mean, they did a nightlife commissioner. Why can't we have an outdoor dining commissioner during this pandemic time? If 311 is not working to direct all the complaints to the right agencies, then we need someone who is, you know, at the head of this, that is corralling all the other agencies. And now that, I mean, DOB is a relatively new entrant to the agency mix that we have in all of this, and it's just really turning into more frustrations for everyone, I think.
And so in our resolution, thanks for that, Joe. And so in our resolution last month, you know, we did outline that we wanted this to be with one agency, specifically DCWP. So are we saying we want to do something beyond that? In our response this month, you know, do we need a formal response this month?
I mean, we could write a letter to the mayor and just, you know, he's, you know, as Kyle said, all roads lead to the mayor. And if we want to comment on, you know, the significant concerns with respect to propane, you know, I mean, that's, if it's an accident waiting to happen, why are we waiting? I mean, that's pretty extreme, the consequences of that accident. You know, especially if people are hiding things, you know, and willfully circumventing the rules.
All right, I will add, any comments on that from the committee?
Happy for a letter for the
mayor.
mayor.
They weren't here. We should write a letter being upset that, you know, why weren't they? And these are the questions that we need answered. I mean, I agree with Carter. That might be.
But what about the propane?
He's the one who issued the directive on the propane also.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, because Dan, I think you were indicated before that it might be over in a few months.
No, I was just saying that, and you know, Captain Lynch is here. Correct me if I'm wrong. That the intention is not to make it permanent. That there is no plans for permanent heaters.
To my knowledge, I was not told that it's the propane heaters are. My impression was that it was, you know, for this emergency, economic emergency, you know, their use is seasonal. And so they're certainly going to be permitted, you know, probably through April, I would expect, of 2021. But as far as, you know, your guess is as good as mine. If outdoor dining and, you know, people building these structures on the roadway, are they going to be there forever? That I do not know for certain. But my impression was from trainings and meetings that I've attended, that this is, this program is for an emergency economic situation, and that their use should be obviously discontinued when the weather is favorable.
Thank you, Captain Lynch. So it sounds like what's on the table now is writing a letter to the mayor regarding propane heaters. Is there someone at FDNY we should also be directing that to, Captain Lynch?
Yeah, the fire commissioner, I would say, Daniel Nigro. Maybe Ms. Sanchez could probably speak to that better than I could, but in my view, if a community board wanted a letter to go to the fire department, then that's the mayor's commissioner.
Thank you.
Head of the agency. So.
Thank you, Captain Lynch. And to the committee, now that this is on the table now, it sounds like a letter to the mayor regarding our position on propane heaters is what's here, and that our position is what? So one, are you
Here, I have a thought on something here, and I'm David, even though he's not speaking, is resonating in my brain here from the last meeting, and the issue here is the one size fits all answer. And, I think that instead of speaking more broadly, we should just say in our community, we're observing, widespread use of the heaters, and it's a concern that the resources of the fire department having to go out proactively in finding, in certain neighborhoods, widespread violations, that's really a concern. And that's really what we want to address, because, there very easily could be in other communities, places that can safely store the propane, they've got outdoor areas. It's just not in this area in Manhattan that those locations are widespread. And I don't know, and I haven't heard of personally, but maybe it's happening, if any of these vendors are driving around, picking up the propane at night and dropping it off in the morning. I mean, that sounds, if there are only two groups doing it, sounds unrealistic, but we should maybe just focus on, instead of saying no, just on the enforcement aspect of it. Because nobody would be storing propane in their personal vehicles if you can't use the propane heaters in the first place, right? So, I mean, even that's pretty scary though, the storage in the cars.
I agree.
That's kind of nuts.
Yeah, that's pretty terrifying.
It's actually a federal DOT regulation that we have no authority on, believe it or not.
Yeah, and the other issue that goes with that, Captain Lynch, is I don't think that you can transport those propane canisters across any of our bridges, right? Or certainly not through the tunnels. They have the signs, but can you?
Not through tunnels. Yeah, you're right.
Not through tunnels, right? Okay, but bridges is okay?
Bridges are permitted, yeah.
All right, so to the committee, we want to take a vote on writing this letter to the mayor regarding propane heaters.
Yeah, I don't think we have to necessarily take a vote. I think we can write the letter. If people are, we can bring it to the executive committee and we'll just write the letter with.
Yeah, maybe in the executive committee.
It's consistent with our positions, our current and past positions.
So are you saying this doesn't have to go before the full board, or?
No,
okay.
Because it's yeah.
I just wanted to show everybody that I have a picture here with 10 of these 20-gallon propane tanks being taken out of a car at a local restaurant. So this is just one car, and there's 15 in the picture.
And I think that the guidance on the propane, I mean, really, I mean, I haven't read it recently. I think I read it when it first came out, but it really needs to preface that this is not reasonable in most areas in certain parts of Manhattan, or, it's not achievable.
All right. Well, if there's no other comments thanks, Carter. If there's no other comments from the committee, then I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you very much, Captain Lynch.
Yes, thank you, Captain Lynch. Thank you, Sandra,
Thank
for staying
you,
with us.
Captain.
You're very welcome. Very happy to be here.
And
Ask me anytime.
And Ms. Sanchez, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Captain Lynch. All right, good night, everyone.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Be well.